What's up, y'all? So we're gonna do a tier list today. We're gonna be taking the latest U.S. news. I think it's 2022 rankings, and despite it not being perfect, despite the rankings themselves being kind of subject to a lot of other issues like major choice and maybe personal situations, it's still a pretty decent guide. And so I thought that this would be helpful for you guys to start getting a sense of what the different tiers are. And granted, the tiers that I'm going to be listing here are really just my personal preference. I'm sure that other people will have different point of views and be able to point out, oh my gosh, there's this college that's actually really good for engineering, so it should be higher up. And I totally understand that. I'm just trying to give you a general sense of it all. So I have this initial please read in a spreadsheet that I hope to be able to link to you guys below. So let's jump through that first. So please read. The rankings are not definitive of your chances. The tier list is more of a general guide that requires much more personal tuning. Your chances are uniquely dependent upon your personal circumstances. These rankings do not take into account major specific rankings. Some colleges will have higher or lower requirements depending on your major choice. Seek professional advice to tailor your profile to ensure most suitable college list for you. So there's these tabs at the bottom right here, and that's what we're going to try to take a look at. Let's start with the U.S. News National Research Universities. So you might run into the first question off the bat, which is the fact that U.S. News separates into research universities and liberal arts colleges. There's actually a really good summary and write-up about this. It's really easy to do. You just go on Google and you type in liberal arts colleges versus national universities. That's misspelled. And I think niche.com has a really good breakdown of it. So you could check that out. Of course, there's multiple ways to explaining it, so feel free to kind of do your own research there. That's not the intent for this video. I obviously have my own opinions about what is better or what is a better fit for you, and maybe I can do that in a separate video. But let's go back to the tier list here. So if you could see, I spent a lot of time yesterday night just getting this all together. The vast majority of this, especially as you go further down, I went to rank 103, is going to be pulled directly from US News. But you'll see that sometimes I have these kinds of notes here, and US News is not completely accurate, guys. Like some of the data I realized is from like 2019 and they're outdated. Some data you just can't find. Like for example, Caltech doesn't necessarily give out the most recent data, and so you kind of have to extrapolate and look for third-party sources. So again, very clearly this is not like 100% accurate, but it's close enough. It's close enough to do the job. And yeah, so Princeton, Columbia, Harvard, MIT, Yale, you can see how sometimes they're tied in rank. What I think I want to do is try to identify and group them into different tiers. So like I want to see if I can try to create a tier 1 category, meaning that it's like the top of the top, the hardest schools to get into. And what I mean by tier 1. So what I'm going to be looking at here is definitely Princeton, and the question is, where does my first tier of schools typically get cut off? Where does it end? I'd argue Caltech, definitely tier 1. Duke is, I think of Duke as kind of like the Ivy League of the South, or it's North Carolina, but I think what I want to do is include Duke. I want to include Johns Hopkins. Northwestern has been insane. I mean, a 7% acceptance chance. Granted, it's nowhere, it's almost double when you're thinking about some of these other schools up here. So it really becomes a question. Do I want to base it off of the total acceptance rate? Because that's not necessarily fair. A school could be extremely more popular for whatever reason, and therefore have an acceptance rate that's much lower. Whereas some schools that are really good and really hard to get into, like their test scores are really high, but then their acceptance rate is much higher because it's just, for whatever reason, a less popular school. So on the one hand, I'm looking at the acceptance rates. I just throw in the salaries. I was meeting with a student yesterday. He's a sophomore that I think he came to get help with someone like me because he doesn't quite understand why he needs to study his butt off in high school. And I think he's watched a lot of "you don't need to go to college" type of videos. And so I wanted to throw in the salary here just to give him a frame of reference. I think there's a video online. I forgot the YouTube channel, but if you ever have the question of why you should go to college, I would be the first to admit that college is not for everyone. Um, think of it as like a life build. Like some builds are just not meant for you. But for the vast majority of people, maybe like 80, 90% of people, it's like the go-to build. It's the stable build, life build. I remember reading a stat that if you have a college degree in the United States, over your lifetime, you will make $1 million more than someone who didn't go to college and just settle with a GED, a high school diploma. But of course, you have plenty of other examples of students that go to a great college, but then they kind of waste the opportunity and then they go deeply into debt. The opposite of that is a student who didn't go to college, but then was very industrious, productive, independent, and then started their own company or went deep into a trade industry that was in high demand, like electricians or whatnot, and they end up making more money than students who graduated from a 4-year and are now racked with debt. There's a lot of those stories. Honestly, vast majority of that is really cherry picking. At the end of the day, just look at the stats, guys. Just look at the data. Go to Bureau of Labor Statistics. Look at the Fortune 500 companies. Look at most of the higher accolade positions, job markets. You'll typically find that the higher your education, the more conducive it is to reach a higher social strata in your life. And I'm not here to argue that. Let's go back to the tier list. I just wanted to explain why I put the salary in there. It's for one of my students yesterday. Average test score is pretty interesting to me. I'm looking at the upper threshold, but if you see the upper threshold, 1570, 1560, 1580, it doesn't really make a difference. It kind of harkens to the typical like overbearing advice I see in students from parents a lot, that you got a 1550, you got to retake it and get a 1580. Honestly, I don't think that's really the case. I mean, you could just look at the data. So long as you're closer to around like a 1530, I feel like you're in a sweet spot where you don't have to worry too much anymore. In fact, I'd argue it's better that you spend your time investing in stronger activities at that point. Imagine having a 1530 and then having really potato activities, right? And you're just so busy focusing on just getting to that 1580 or 1600. That extra increment advantage that you get in the test score is not going to compensate for potato activities. So it's kind of like diminishing investment returns if you focus too much on a test score. But what I am looking at is kind of the low end. And I'm realizing that somewhere around Johns Hopkins and Duke is where you really start to get a general sense of a tier that's a little under. So what I think I want to do is I want to include Brown, or actually I want to include Dartmouth, like 6.7, 17, 1440. I think what I want to do is I want to make this category my tier 1. So let's see if I can go ahead and do that. Let's go with Brown tier 1. And what do I mean by tier 1? I think that these tier 1 schools have some basic expectations to them. So let me see if I can maybe create a sheet here and do tier explanations. So let's say we have a tier, and let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, the OCD in me is kicking in a bit. Let me make sure. Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm tempted, maybe I might go to like a 1.5 here, but in terms of unweighted GPA, I think there's no question about this, that this needs to be around a 3.95 plus. So that's unweighted. That means throughout your entire high school career, you maybe get like a B plus, right? And the rest are straight A's. In terms of weighted GPA, this one's a little bit trickier. Your weighted GPA, someone can throw out a number. Oh, you have a 4.8. 4.8 sounds insane, but there are some high schools where the max you can get is actually like a 4.4 or a 4.3 because some schools perhaps won't allow you to take weighted classes your 9th grade and 10th grade. So in truth, the weighted GPA is kind of difficult to kind of calibrate. I can give it a number. Let's say to me it'd be like a 4.3 plus, but do you see how it doesn't really say anything? It's a 4.3. It could be like the bottom 20 percentile, or it could be the upper 20 percentile of a high school, whereas like a 4.8 would be like the upper 1%. So what I think I'd want to do instead is with your weighted GPA, it's still important. It still shows me, the rigor of your coursework, but it needs to be put in the context of the high school you attend. So typically, I'd say you want to be in the top 1 to 5% of your weighted GPA at your school. Do I care about a test score? Remember, more of these test scores are starting to become optional, but I would argue in some circumstances, especially in competitive environments, your test score can still benefit you. So for me, I would consider putting this closer to maybe a 15, 30 plus. The ACT equivalent of that, let's see, I'd say is 35. So then what is tier 2? I think tier 2 gets closer to maybe around, I still think like a tier 2 schools have a little bit of a unweighted GPA boost expectation. Maybe we get closer to a 3.8. 3.8 means maybe 2 Bs, maybe 3.75, 3.69, somewhere around there. The weighted GPA for me, I think at this point goes more to it's like 5 to 10%. And then your SAT score, let's say, is closer to about a 1480, 1460, 1480. And then your ACT score would be maybe 33, 34. Tier 3 students typically are closer to around a 3.6 unweighted GPA. So that means they either got like 1C, 1B, or they had like 3, 4, maybe 5 Bs. A 3.6, in terms of a weighted GPA, I'd say percentage-wise you want to be in the maybe top 20 to 25%. And that would get you closer to, I'd say maybe like a 1380 plus. And that to me maybe is more of a 30, 31, I'd say 31 plus score. And then we have tier 4. Tier 4 I think is definitely going to be more in the maybe 3.4 category. Let's say this is closer to maybe the weighted GPA within the 40 percentile. And then we get something closer to maybe a 1300 flat. And that puts us closer to maybe a 28. Actually, let me double check that. That's really easy to do. SAT, ACT conversion. And then if you could just do a conversion chart. Let's just check something real quick. So if I'm looking closer to a 28, 1300, am I on the money here? Yeah. What do you know? Wow, my brain actually works. Cool. So tier 5 I think is where you're hitting more of like the 2.8 to 3.2 plus range. And this is where your weighted GPA is kind of iffy, 60 percentile. Let's say 13, I don't know. This is closer to maybe even like a 11,800 plus. I don't think I'd be able to answer this one correctly. Maybe 25, 26. Let's see. 25 is 12. Man, it's closer more to like a 23. So let me adjust that. Maybe 23, 24 ACT score. Again, I'm ballparking this. By the way, if you're wondering like what do I mean by the percentages, I'll try giving you a quick little demonstration or a picture here. So imagine that this is your high school and these are all the students in your let me see if I could get my iPad to work here. Hold on. Sorry about that, guys. Let me get the broadcasting going. Okay, cool. All right, so suppose that this is the bell curve of your school. The 50 percentile students would be right around here. Generally speaking, you can think of it as like the top 5%. This is closer to the tier 1 category. And then you have the top 10%, and that's going to be like the tier 2 category. And then it's the top maybe 25%, and that could be closer to the tier 3 category. You want to realize that your competition, GPA wise, weighted or unweighted, is really determined by your environment, by your high school. There's a lot of discussions about why this is the case, and maybe for another time we could go into discussions and opinions about that, but that's what I mean by your weighted GPA. So instead of giving you a 4.8 or 4.6, because it can differ and it can vary based on high school, I think I want to suggest that it should be more about a percentage. You can have ranks too, right? You can be 1 out of 500 and just do the math there, right? 1 out of 500, 1 out of 250. You can figure out the percentage of where you think you lie. Anyways, back to the tiers. So US News rankings, that's what I think I'd go for. I think down to Dartmouth. I do think Dartmouth students and up tend to be in the top 5%. Granted, maybe you'll be like, but I heard, Jay, that this student last year, he was actually not a tier 1 GPA student. He still got in. There's going to be exceptions like that. Sports, national level recruitment. Maybe you did amazing activities. Maybe your GPA is not strong because in 10th grade you took a dip. But you have a really good explanation for that. Like your parents got really sick and you had to start taking care of your younger siblings, things of that nature. But for the vast majority of cases, I'd say you have to be maybe in the top 5 percentile. And in terms of test scores, you want to kind of be in the middle of this. So the middle of this is closer to maybe 1520, 1530 for these. So there's tier 1. And then I'd say tier 2 begins around rank 14. Tier 2 to me will go down, I'd probably say go down closer to around maybe in USC. I'd probably go this far. So these would be tier 2 schools. So Brown, Vanderbilt, Washington University, Cornell, Rice, Notre Dame, UCLA, Emory, Berkeley, Georgetown, Michigan, Carnegie Mellon, UVA. And I'd probably drop it to USC. I'd stop there. Tier 2 schools, as I mentioned, I think tier 2s are closer to 3.8 or higher. They're in the more 5 to 10% category. I do have a quick little note about this, actually. UCLA, as you noticed, I put into tier 2. See, this is where tiering stuff becomes kind of hard to do, and you're going to get a lot of people who are going to pick out issues with it, and it's all valid. For the most part, it will be pretty valid pickings. Because let me show you. You can go to UCLA admission stats, and here's the freshman profile. It's the most recent that they come up with. So let's see if I can get freshman. See full freshman profile. And then we go to the latest info, fall 2020. And here's something interesting that you'll see. So this is all freshman applicants, domestic and international. Look at this, the unweighted GPA. So if you have an unweighted GPA of a 3.95, your admit rate was 39%. 39% to top 20 school. That's pretty insane. But the moment your unweighted GPA drops below 3.95 to 3.94, look at how your chances just plummet. So, public schools generally focus and give more emphasis on GPA. Has to do with the whole distribution curve and how that's their way of selecting students more equally across districts, even though some districts will be more competitive than others. So the unweighted GPA undoubtedly to me is one of the big factors, big checkpoints for me. But I know it's a 3.95 to a certain degree. Then it's kind of like a tier 1 school, right? The tier 1 school is looking for that 3.95, but that gives you what, that 39%. So I'm going to drop it down to tier 2. I think 3.8 still gives you about that 8% plus chance, and I think that's fair to therefore put it into tier 2. I definitely think that UCLA is easier to get into than most of these tier 1s, so I wouldn't be able to put them in the same category. But it goes to show that tiering schools, it's really tough to do. You're going to have so many other counterpoints and arguments you can make, so just bear with me though. After you get to rank 27 USC, I think that's where you begin to get to tier 3. So tier 3 for me incorporates the schools like UCI, UC San Diego, obviously NYU, Santa Barbara. I'd probably want to bring it as close down to Davis. I think I would put it down to Davis. Boston University is actually pretty strong too. It's hard to get into at 18%. But you can see how we went, guys, we started at what, 3%, single digits, and now we're closer to the 10, 20. Some of these are 30. So I think what I would want to do is put tier 3 schools down to probably Boston University. I'd probably go to Boston University for these, so I'll put these as tier 3. All the way down. And then from there we have Brandeis. So Brandeis to me would be tier 4. That makes sense to me. Bear in mind, again, there are some schools that it kind of depends on your major choice. For example, Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, if you're applying as a computer science or engineering major, that would be more like a tier 2 school. But as a whole, I think it just fits under tier 3. So again, your major choice can make a difference here as well. And I think that requires further research on your end, if that's your case. But we have down to Lehigh, Northeastern. Northeastern has been on a tear, like a 20% acceptance rate. This to me, I feel like I want to give this a tier 3 category, despite the fact that it's smack dab in the middle of tier 4s in my eyes. But see, this is why I think I'm just gonna leave the 3 there. I think Northeastern has become harder to get into. Look at that upper band and lower band of SAT score expectations. That's pretty insane for a rank 49 school. So, by the way, why is it ranked so low? It's because US News uses more than just academic metrics of getting accepted. Like, for example, one of the vectors would be the graduation rate, retention rate. And a lot of that, to me, is noise when it comes to what we're focused on, which is getting into the college and not necessarily the other parts that go into these kinds of rankings. But yeah, a rank 49 school has a 1410 to 1540 band of, in terms of the middle 50 percentile SAT scores. That's what this is, by the way. This is the 50 percentile, the median, in a sense, of the SAT scores that were accepted in previous years. I'm going to keep that as a 3. I think the rest of these, Brandeis is pretty decent too, but I think I'm going to put these under 4. I would go down to Pepperdine. Purdue, another great example of a school that's, it's ranked 49, but and you see this bandwidth of the SAT score. But if you were able to pull out data specifically just for engineering, I promise you that would be much higher. So Purdue is another one of those schools where I think it depends on the major choice. However, I still think it's going to be a 4 school for me. Villanova. Notice how most of these are like fluctuating quite a bit in terms of acceptance rate. This is the regular total acceptance rate. Quick little note about this, by the way. The way they calculate regular acceptance rate can be, it's not uniform. So these numbers are really also not, you got to take it with a pinch of salt. For example, some schools will say, the total acceptance is, they won't even give you that. They'll just do overall acceptances. And unfortunately, if that's the only data I got, I put that down here. Other schools will only do the regular students without considering deferred students. And then another school will say regular students plus deferred and then give you the total. So if you're going to be researching this up, just be advised. I try to kind of, for the first maybe 30 or 40 schools, cite my source and show you and try to get you something as up to date as possible. But for some of these, in fact, a lot of these, it was just not easy to get something straight from the horse's mouth here. So I took the best number that I thought was reasonable, and hopefully we could still live with that. Villanova, 25% as a rank 49 school. That's pretty insane. 1,400. Yeah, Villanova is really good. Their business program, their alumni network, their networking, their internship pipelines, really good. Villanova is super underrated in terms of kind of name value schools, quote unquote. But I think I'm going to put Villanova as 4. And I think from there, I also have Rensselaer Polytechnic. Look at that salary, by the way. It's a rank 55 school, and the average salary, and you'll see right away that usually the salary is higher if the school is popular or reputable for engineering or computer science, and it makes sense in terms of job markets. That's what pays higher. Let's see. I'm going to go with... Oh man, that's a tough one. RPI, I think in terms of engineering, would be like a rank 3 school. But that's really all it does for the most part, besides business, I suppose. I think I'm going to give it a 3 mark here because it's honestly pretty decent. And the test score requirements for engineering, because that's the intent of why you'd want to apply. Why would you want to apply to RPI? Because of their engineering. Yeah, I think I'm going to do a 3 there. Leave the rest as 4s, all the way down to, let's say, Maryland, Pittsburgh, Washington University, Seattle. Okay, quick little note about Washington University, Seattle. A lot of students are interested in this school, but you got to bear in mind that this is a public school for the state of Washington. So as a public institution, their priority is to service the Washington residents. So if you're out of state or if you're international, schools like these, public schools that are designed and purposed to service their state residents, you're going to be put to a much smaller acceptance percentage. So I think it still fits in 4 though. Yeah, I think I'm going to keep it in 4. George Washington, I'm going to also go to 4. Rutgers is great too, but again, state school. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that. And then when it comes to tier 5s, I think I'm going to focus on tier 5s as you go further below. Man, does Texas A&M? I think at a certain point, like we're dipping now into the underneath the 1200 mark. I mean, yeah, there's Syracuse at that, but that's to me not. Syracuse is still a pretty good school. Pretty popular. So I think I'm gonna start going with tier 5s from here. Yeah, I'm fine with that. I can live with that. Again, there's so many exceptions to this, and I'm probably missing a ton of them. But the point of this is to kind of show you guys where you can expect. If let's say you're a tier 2 academic student, then you know that your tier 1s here are going to be potentially reaches. So, and then if you're a tier 2 student, smack dead on, then these are the range of schools that you would probably have a reasonable shot at. I'm trying to show this to you guys so that you can start measuring generally where you think you'll fit. Like I said before, if your major choice is going to play a big role, then be advised that you probably want to do a little bit more in-depth digging or research. But yeah, do I want to go past tier 5? I mean, I feel like the rest of these are pretty much 5 and 5 plus. I got a bit of a hot take here. I feel like at a certain point, like when you're realizing that some of these schools are accepting 70, 80, 90% of the students, and the test scores are really not that strong, there is a good argument where you need to start thinking about what your bottom line is. Like at a certain point, I think it becomes more economically, logically feasible. It just becomes a better idea to do a community college and transfer. Because I've seen a lot of students, let's say they took a lot of damage in high school. They didn't do too well in 1 or 2 semesters or something like that, and they couldn't get into a great school. And rather than applying for like a rank 60 to 100 school, they bit the bullet and just said, you know what, I'm going to go to community college and I'm going to try to transfer to USC after 1 year. And I've seen students do that very successfully, right? I've also seen students try to do that, and the truth is, it was a pipe dream. They didn't learn their lesson from high school. They're still lazy. They still didn't do their work, and now they're stuck in limbo in a 3rd, 4th, 5th year at a community college, and that becomes a huge just time sink, money sink. But that becomes then again a personal kind of thought process and discussion that you should have, either with someone who has experience in this, or someone who can give you some insight into what your possibilities are. But yeah, I think the rest of these I just put as like 5 plus, I suppose. Maybe I should just do 6. Yeah, I'll just do 6. I'm not gonna add the GPA expectations for category 6, guys. It's low. All right. if it's at that point, where we have to talk about tier 6, this is where 6 versus CC transfer, or even Cal States or state colleges would be a better option for you, perhaps. I'm not going to go over liberal arts. Liberal arts is even more sticky, even more difficult to tier out. Maybe I'll save that for another time, another video. But yeah, this is the tier list that I'm thinking based on the new updated rankings of 2022 this year. Again, there are a lot of issues with me doing this. Part of me thinks like I shouldn't even be doing this. I can be welcoming so much criticism in terms of, oh, but this school that school this. But I decided, I still want to give it a shot. I still want to give you a general sense of where you lie once you have a better understanding of your academic tier. Don't forget, it's not just your academic tier. You can also be thinking about how you can clutch with your activities. If you have amazing activities and you're a tier 2 student, there are good opportunities for you to still try to apply for maybe the bottom half of tier 1 schools. Like, I've seen it happen a lot of times, depending on how great your activities have been and whether or not it's a story of redemption. Maybe you just had really bad grades in 10th grade and in 11th, and then going into senior year first semester, you're just getting straight A's. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, I hope that this was helpful for you guys. I'm gonna move on now to do more of a basic presentation on how to build a college list. I hope to upload that later today as well. Anyways, thank you guys so much for your time, and I hope this helped.